Alright, here's the start of a story that I thought belonged only in some dark, twisted corner of someone else's life. Turns out the plot twist was closer than I thought. It was a typical Tuesday morning, and I was going through my usual routine. Coffee in hand, I was about to head out the door for work when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, and it was my brother, Dave. Now, Dave and I have always been close, and I know he wouldn't call this early unless it was serious. Dave's a detective. He's seen enough messed up things in his life to know not to overreact, so I was instantly on edge. "Hey, you busy?" He started, voice low, as if someone might be listening in. "No, what's up?" I said, heart already thumping. The tone wasn't casual. Something was wrong, I could feel it. "Listen," he paused. "I found something you need to know about, but I don't even know how to tell you this." He let out a sigh, then continued, "Emily. She's been keeping a DNA test hidden. I came across it during a case. Long story short, her name came up in a file. Now, I have no idea why my wife would have a DNA test, let alone why she'd keep it hidden from me. And I definitely don't know what that has to do with my brother's work. But suddenly, the past few weeks flashed through my mind like a jigsaw puzzle clicking together. Emily's late nights, the secrets, the little lies she tried to pass off as misunderstandings. My mind raced, barely able to keep up with the tornado of questions slamming through it. Did this test have something to do with Lucy? Was she not really mine? The thought made me feel like I'd been punched straight in the gut. Or was it something else? Another child? Every horrible scenario played out in my head. "Dave," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you saying is she hiding something about Lucy? Is she hiding something about us?" There was a silence. Then, in a voice that was soft, almost apologetic, he said, "I can't tell you more. I just thought you deserved to know." I hung up, throat dry, hands shaking. Everything felt different. I stood in the doorway, frozen, my mind scrambling for any explanation that made sense. But no matter how I twisted the puzzle pieces, nothing added up. I decided to confront Emily that night. I spent the day in a daze, waiting for her to come home. By the time she walked through the door, it felt like I'd been replaying this confrontation in my head for hours, each version more intense than the last. I could barely look at her without feeling the weight of what Dave had told me. "Hey," she said casually, setting her purse down and glancing at me. "Long day." "Yeah," I said, feeling my voice catch a bit. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." Her face shifted slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. She smiled, but it felt tight, forced. "All right, what's up?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Why don't you tell me what's going on first?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Anything you'd like to come clean about?" Her eyes widened, just for a split second, and then her expression shifted back into this calm, almost too relaxed look. "Come clean about what?" She folded her arms and gave me a little laugh, like I was being ridiculous. But her calmness only fueled my anger. "I got a call today," I said, watching her closely. "From Dave." Her face went still. "He told me he found out you've been hiding a DNA test. Care to explain why my own brother has to be the one to tell me about it?" Emily's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, confusion, and then a look that made my stomach drop. She rolled her eyes, waving a dismissive hand. "A DNA test? Really? That's what you're so worked up about?" "Worked up?" I repeated, struggling to keep my voice down. "You're damn right I'm worked up. What is going on, Emily? Why would you keep something like that from me?" She let out a heavy sigh, as if I were a child asking a ridiculous question. "It's nothing, all right? Just something I did a while back. Not everything is some grand conspiracy, you know? So why hide it?" I shot back, barely able to keep the edge out of my voice. "You could have just told me, but instead, I had to hear about it from Dave in the middle of a case, no less. How do you expect me to trust you if I find out about something like this through my own brother? Because I knew you'd overreact like this," she snapped, her tone turning icy. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You think I'm hiding something big? But it's nothing. Just drop it." It felt like I just walked into some alternate version of my life, where my wife could stand there, look me dead in the eyes, and brush me off like I was asking about the weather. Her reaction wasn't fear or regret. It was annoyance, like I was inconveniencing her. That was when I realized she wasn't scared of being caught. She didn't feel guilty at all. And the thought hit me harder than anything she could have said that I couldn't let it go. Her attitude, that dismissive, arrogant twist of a smirk, only confirmed that there was something she was hiding, and it was more than just a random DNA test. The silence stretched between us, heavy and tense, and I could feel her patience thinning. "Emily," I said, taking a step closer, "I don't think you understand the position you're putting me in. I deserve answers. What was the DNA test for? Who was it for?" She scoffed, crossing her arms. "For God's sake, stop acting like this is some murder investigation. It's not even that big a deal." "Not that big a deal?" I repeated, trying to hold back the bitterness rising in my throat. "Then explain it to me. Make me understand how you, my wife, have a hidden DNA test that somehow showed up in my brother's case file. Explain how that's not a big deal." She looked at me for a long second, her expression unreadable, and then something in her eyes shifted. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth?" I took a test, a stupid DNA test, because... She hesitated, but it was brief. "Because I had doubts about Lucy, all right?" The air seemed to vanish from the room. My legs felt weak, like I'd been hit with a wave I wasn't prepared for. "Doubts?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "Doubts about what, Emily?" "About Lucy being my daughter." She rolled her eyes again, but this time, there was something else in her gaze. Something sharp, almost malicious. "No, I needed to know for myself, for reasons that have nothing to do with you. And when I found out, I decided not to say anything because I knew you'd blow it all out of proportion." She glanced away, shrugging as if it was all inconsequential. But I saw the coldness there, the way she was protecting some hidden truth behind that indifference. My mind was racing. If she had doubts about Lucy, that meant she'd done something, been with someone else around the time Lucy was conceived. But she wouldn't even tell me the results. Was Lucy my daughter? Or was she just standing there, watching me drown in my own suspicions, knowing the answer and refusing to say? "Emily," I said, struggling to stay calm. "Just tell me the truth. Is she mine?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Her eyes flickered, and I saw a trace of something almost triumphant, like she'd been waiting for me to break and ask that exact question. "You're really going to make this about you?" she sneered. "God, you're so predictable." She grabbed her purse off the counter and tossed her hair over her shoulder with a scoff. "I'm done with this conversation. Maybe you should learn to trust your wife instead of playing detective. Or is it just easier for you to blame me?" And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving me there, hanging on to the edge of a truth she refused to give me. As the front door slammed shut behind her, a realization settled in my chest, cold and heavy. Whatever this was, this twisted game she was playing, she wasn't done with it yet. That I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve in my body wound tight. Questions kept bouncing through my mind, like relentless static I couldn't turn off. I kept replaying her words, her dismissive smirk, the casual way she tossed my entire world aside like it was nothing. Around 3 a.m., I found myself reaching for my phone and texting Dave. "Need to talk tomorrow. It's about Emily. I need to know everything you found." He responded almost immediately. "Meet me at the diner at 7. When I walked in the next morning, Dave was already there, seated in the corner booth, sipping black coffee. He looked up as I slid into the seat across from him, and I could see a glint of hesitation in his eyes. "All right, spill it," I said, skipping the small talk. "You wouldn't have told me about that DNA test if you didn't think something was seriously off." Dave sighed, setting down his cup. "Look, I didn't want to drag you into this, but when I found her name in one of my cases, I couldn't ignore it. The thing is, her name wasn't just in a random file. It was in a file that linked her to a known fraud ring. There's a possibility she forged some documents. Financial fraud, identity issues, DNA tampering. Emily's name came up more than once. I blinked, trying to absorb his words. "Wait, so you're saying she might have tampered with the DNA results? Like, as in, She was hiding who Lucy's real father is. He nodded slowly. Possibly. Look, I don't have concrete proof of what she did exactly, but the group she's linked with is involved in faking DNA tests, medical records, even paternity results. If she was desperate enough to keep this hidden, she may have done things you wouldn't believe. There's a high chance she knows the results but is keeping them from you. Or worse, she's twisted them so you'd never find out. The words hit like a hammer to the chest. My own wife. Manipulating evidence to keep the truth from me? To keep me in the dark about my own daughter? My throat tightened as the weight of betrayal settled in. Dave, if that's true, I can't believe she'd go this far. I mean, why? Why not just tell me the truth? She has her reasons, I'm sure, Dave said grimly. But listen, if you want to know for sure, there's a way. I can help you get an independent DNA test done for Lucy. Private lab, no one will know. And then at least you'll know the truth, whatever it is. I sat there, staring into my coffee, the truth crashing down over me in waves. Emily wasn't just lying to me. She was actively working to keep me from the truth, manipulating me, even bringing our daughter into it. I thought about Lucy's face, her big blue eyes that reminded me so much of my own mother's, and for a second, I almost let myself believe she had to be mine. But what if she wasn't? I looked up at Dave, my mind made up. Let's do it. Whatever it takes, I need to know. I'm done letting her control this. Dave nodded, his eyes steely with determination. Then let's get to the bottom of this. That evening, I came home with a mix of dread and resolve swirling in my chest. I felt like a stranger in my own house. Emily was in the kitchen, casually scrolling on her phone with Lucy playing nearby. She barely looked up when I walked in, her smile faint and far too normal, as if last night's argument hadn't even happened. I had to play along, at least for now. With Dave's help, I'd set up an appointment at a private lab in 2 days. All I had to do was get a sample from Lucy, something small like a hair or a cheek swab. It felt wrong to sneak around like this, but it was the only way to cut through Emily's web of lies. As we sat down for dinner, I tried to keep my expression neutral. Lucy babbled about her day at kindergarten, proudly telling me about a drawing she'd made. She ran off to get it from her backpack, and I watched her go, my heart twisting. She looked so much like me. Or was that just what I wanted to believe? Every time I tried to see her as mine, Emily's smirk flashed in my memory, taunting me with doubt. Emily caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. Something on your mind? She asked, her voice almost challenging. I forced a smile. Just a long day at work. Nothing new. She shrugged, as if she didn't care either way, and turned back to her plate. But there was something different about her tonight. Something sharper, more watchful. I wondered if she'd sensed that I was up to something. After dinner, as Lucy was getting ready for bed, Emily pulled me aside in the hallway, blocking my path. Her eyes narrowed, studying me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. So, are we really going to play this game? Or are you going to just admit you're trying to dig up some dirt on me? She asked, her voice low and venomous. The blood drained from my face, but I held my ground. What are you talking about? I said, trying to sound casual. She smirked, crossing her arms. You think I don't know you're running around with your detective brother? Looking into me? I know everything, sweetheart. I could practically feel your suspicions from across the room tonight. She knew. Somehow she'd caught on to the plan, and she was daring me to admit it. What are you so worried about? I shot back, meeting her stare. If there's nothing to hide, why are you so concerned? She stepped closer, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because I know you, and I know you're not going to stop until you find exactly what you're looking for. But be careful, because you might not like what you find. I held her gaze, my fists clenched. You're right. I won't stop. And when I find out what you've been hiding, don't expect me to just sit back and accept it. She smiled. A cold, calculating smile that made my skin crawl. We'll see about that, she whispered, and with one last look, she turned and walked down the hall, leaving me standing there, more determined than ever to expose her lies. The next day felt like walking through quicksand, each moment dragging, every second weighing down on me. I was barely functioning at work, counting down until the appointment at the lab. My nerves were frayed, and every thought came back to Emily's cold smile and that ominous warning, Be careful, because you might not like what you find. That night, I went through the bedtime routine with Lucy. We read her favorite story, but my mind kept wandering to the test I'd be bringing in tomorrow. When I leaned in to kiss her goodnight, I ran my fingers through her hair, gently plucking a single strand as I did. She didn't notice, drifting off to sleep with her small hand resting in mine. I slipped the hair into a small envelope, the gravity of my actions settling hard on my shoulders. Emily was already in the living room when I came down, casually scrolling through her phone, just as she'd been the night before. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, then went back to whatever she was doing without a word. I sat down across from her, a silent standoff forming between us. The air felt charged, like we were both waiting for the other to break. And then, out of nowhere, she set her phone down and said, "You're going to do it, aren't you? You're really going to go behind my back, test our daughter, and act like I'm the villain here." Her voice was calm, but her eyes had this dark glint, a mixture of disdain and amusement that made my skin crawl. I didn't even bother pretending to deny it. "You're damn right I am. I don't know who you are anymore, Emily, but I know you're hiding something. And if it's about Lucy, if you've been lying to me about her." I shook my head, unable to finish the sentence. "Then I have every right to know." She tilted her head, giving me a mockingly sympathetic look. "Poor you, all caught up in your own suspicions. Do you ever wonder what happens if you're wrong?" "What?" I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. If I'm wrong, then I'll be the first to apologize. But you don't get to turn this around on me. This is on you, Emily. You're the one keeping secrets, and I'm done living with my head in the sand." She let out a small, almost pitying laugh, and for the first time, I felt a flash of genuine hatred toward her. "I guess you'll get your answer soon enough," she said, standing up. "But if you want to know the truth, just remember that it won't come without a cost." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving me alone, staring at the empty doorway. Her words lingered, twisting in my gut. It won't come without a cost. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with what she might have meant. The next morning, I took the envelope with Lucy's hair sample and drove to the lab in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My stomach was in knots, but my mind was clear. This was the only way to finally know the truth and break free from the endless cycle of doubt Emily had trapped me in. I handed over the sample and filled out the paperwork, trying not to let my hands shake as I signed my name. They told me it would take a few days, which felt like a lifetime. Leaving the lab, I felt an unsettling mix of relief and dread. Part of me still wanted to believe I was just paranoid, that there was no way Emily could have lied to me for this long, especially about something as huge as Lucy. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I went through the motions at work, tried to keep things light around Lucy, and did my best to avoid Emily whenever possible. But she didn't make it easy. She would watch me, studying me with that cold, knowing smile, like she was waiting for me to unravel. Then, on the fourth day, I got the call. I was sitting at my desk at work when my phone buzzed. I saw the lab's number flashing on the screen, and my heart nearly stopped. Hands clammy, I stepped out of my office and answered. The voice on the other end was polite, efficient. "We have your results ready, Mr. Miller. You can pick them up anytime today." After a tense silence, I asked, "Is there any way you could give me a quick summary over the phone?" My voice barely came out, but I had to know. The words hung in the air, heavy, as the lab technician hesitated. "I'm sorry, but we really recommend that you come in person for the full results," she replied carefully, adding, "But if you prefer, I can confirm the basics." Her tone was cautious, like she knew the weight of what she was about to say. "Yes," I whispered, "just the basics." Another pause, and then she said, "Based on the analysis, we can confirm there is no biological relationship between you and the sample provided." Everything went cold. I felt like I'd been punched, my mind going numb as the truth sank in, sharp and merciless. Lucy wasn't mine. I thanked her, barely hearing my own voice, and ended the call. Staring down at my phone, I couldn't process anything beyond the single brutal fact that Lucy, the daughter I'd loved with every part of me, raised as my own, was not my child. My world tilted. The ground felt like it had been ripped out from under me, leaving only the nauseating realization that everything I believed in, everything I'd built my life around, was a lie. I don't remember driving home. I just remember gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead, every thought jagged and sharp. Lucy wasn't mine. All this time, Emily had been lying, letting me believe a story she crafted, pulling me deeper into a false reality where I was nothing more than an unwitting prop. When I walked into the house, it was quiet. Emily was at the kitchen counter, casually flipping through a magazine. She glanced up, her eyes flashing with a glimmer of something almost smug. It was like she'd been waiting for me, knowing that I'd finally learned the truth and was teetering on the edge of my own destruction. Couldn't hold back. "You knew, didn't you?" I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You knew Lucy wasn't mine." She didn't flinch. She just closed the magazine, set it down, and crossed her arms, tilting her head with a smile that chilled me to my core. "Took you long enough?" she said calmly, as if this was a game and I'd just lost the final round. The rage that surged through me was like nothing I'd ever felt. "How could you do this?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "How could you let me believe she was my daughter? Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" To her. Her expression remained disturbingly relaxed, like this was all part of a routine she'd rehearsed. "You were so eager to believe it," she replied, her tone dripping with disdain. "So desperate to play the role of doting father, the perfect husband. It was convenient for both of us. And besides," she added with a shrug, "Lucy needed a stable home, didn't she?" I couldn't believe the callousness in her voice, the complete lack of remorse. "You lied to me," I said, my fists clenching, trying to keep myself from shaking. "You used me. You used Lucy." Emily rolled her eyes, her lips curling in a smile that barely masked her contempt. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. You wanted a family. I gave you one. You got exactly what you wanted. And look at you, all these years later, still desperate for answers as if they'll change anything." Her words twisted in my gut like a knife. "Did you ever love me?" I asked, feeling foolish even as the question left my mouth. She paused, then gave me a look that was almost pitying. "I loved the idea of you, of what you could give me, but love? No, I wouldn't call it that." She smirked, her eyes flashing with something cold and unfeeling. "You were always so easy to control, so willing to do whatever it took to keep the peace. And Lucy, well, she got the father figure she needed." I felt hollow, like she'd scraped out everything inside me, leaving nothing but the raw ache of betrayal. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shrugged, picking up her magazine again, as if I were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Now, that's up to you. You wanted the truth, didn't you? Well, there it is. Do what you want with it. Frankly, I don't care." And with that, she turned away, dismissing me as easily as she'd dismissed every promise we'd ever made, every memory I thought we'd shared. That I stood there, frozen, as she calmly turned her back to me, flipping her magazine open with the same ease as if she'd just finished discussing the weather. The reality of her coldness was staggering, like I'd never truly seen her until now. Every word she'd just spoken tore through me, piece by piece, until all that remained was anger. A deep, raw anger that I could barely contain. "I don't know what happened to you," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "or what made you think any of this was okay. But Lucy, she's an innocent child. You didn't just lie to me. You've robbed her of a father who truly deserves her." She gave a dismissive wave, not even bothering to look up. "Spare me the righteous act, will you? You think I don't know what this is? You're hurt and you're lashing out. You'll get over it." She finally glanced up, giving me a look that was almost condescending. "And Lucy? She'll be fine. You've been nothing but a wallet and a bedtime story to her." Her words struck like a slap, but they fueled something inside me, a resolve that had been buried under layers of self-doubt and misplaced trust. "You're wrong," I said quietly, my voice hardening. "Lucy is my daughter, maybe not by blood, but in every other way that matters. And I won't let her suffer because of your lies." Emily's expression flickered for a brief moment, almost as if she hadn't expected me to push back. She leaned back, crossing her arms, and raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "And what exactly do you plan to do?" Run off with her? She's not yours, and if you think for 1 second that any court would give you custody, then you're more naive than I thought. Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I held my ground. I'm not going to abandon her. She may not be my blood, but I raised her. I've been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every single moment. She trusts me. I'm her father, no matter what you think. Emily laughed softly, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. How sweet. But let me make this clear, just so you're not wasting your energy on pointless fantasies. If you even think of taking her from me, I'll make sure you never see her again. And believe me, I'll win. Because when it comes down to it, you don't have any legal rights. You're nothing but a placeholder. Someone I used to fill a role. Her words were like venom, twisting deeper with each sentence. I felt my control slipping, my voice rising despite myself. She's not a role to be filled. She's a person, Emily. A child who deserves better than you. She deserves someone who actually cares about her. Someone who'll put her needs before their own games and lies. Her face darkened, the smirk dropping, and for the first time, I saw real anger in her eyes. I don't think you understand, Mark, she said, her voice like ice. You're just a man I married. Nothing more. You don't get to lecture me about what Lucy deserves. I decide what's best for her, and I can take her away from you anytime I want. For a split second, I felt like I was staring into the face of a stranger, someone completely devoid of the woman I once thought I knew. This wasn't just about betrayal or lies anymore. This was about power, about control. And she would do whatever it took to keep it. But I refused to let her have the final word. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice steady. You may have manipulated me, used me, lied to me, but you won't win. I'll fight for her, Emily. I don't care how hard it is or what it takes. I'll fight for Lucy because she deserves at least one parent who's willing to put her first. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened, and I saw a flash of something that looked almost like doubt. I walked out of the room, refusing to let her see any more of my anger, and made my way upstairs. Upstairs, I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The fight with Emily replayed in my head, her vicious words echoing over and over until it felt like they were carved into my mind. I had to remind myself that Lucy was just down the hall, probably asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm tearing her family apart. I took a deep breath and went to her room, opening the door quietly. She was curled up in her bed, her little face calm and peaceful in the soft glow of her night light. As I watched her sleep, the depth of my love for her overwhelmed me. Blood or not, this girl was my daughter in every way that mattered. And no matter what Emily said, no court, no threat could make me abandon her. I knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the ache in my chest tightened. How many more nights would I have like this, where I could tuck her in and read her stories? Emily's words haunted me. I decide what's best for her, and I can take her away from you anytime I want. Suddenly, an idea struck me. A wild, desperate idea, but it was the only one that offered even the faintest chance of protecting Lucy. I had no legal rights to her, but if I could prove Emily's instability, if I could show a pattern of deception and manipulation, maybe I could at least petition for joint custody. Maybe I could protect Lucy from becoming a pawn in her mother's twisted games. But I'd need proof. Real, undeniable proof of Emily's lies, her manipulation, and her questionable actions. Without that, I was just a man with suspicions and, like she said, no legal standing. I slipped out of Lucy's room, my mind racing. I didn't know where to start, but one thing was clear. Emily wasn't as untouchable as she thought. She'd become too comfortable in her lies, too arrogant in the way she dismissed me. Somewhere she'd made mistakes, and I was determined to find them. The next morning I called Dave. He answered almost immediately, concern evident in his voice. Mark, you all right? What's going on? I didn't bother with pleasantries. Dave, I need your help. I know it's a lot to ask, but you're the only one who might be able to get me what I need. What exactly are we talking about? He asked, his voice cautious. I took a breath. I need you to help me gather evidence. Proof that Emily has been lying, manipulating. Whatever you can find that shows she's unfit to have sole custody of Lucy. Dave hesitated, but then he sighed, the line going silent for a moment. All right, Mark, he finally said. Ich help you. But you have to be prepared. If we go down this road, you might find out things that could hurt you even more. I know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I don't have a choice. I can't let her destroy Lucy's life just to keep me under her control. We hung up, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose, a sliver of hope piercing through the fog of betrayal. Emily thought she'd broken me. She thought she held all the power. But she didn't know that this time, I was done playing by her rules. Over the next few days, I moved with a quiet determination, careful not to let Emily catch even a hint of what I was planning. She must have thought I was defeated, that I'd accepted her twisted version of reality, because she let her guard down, her smug confidence practically dripping with every glance she threw my way, fueled me, steeled my resolve. Let her think I'd given up. She had no idea what was coming. Dave worked behind the scenes, digging into her past and following any lead that might expose the lies she'd woven so meticulously. Every evening, he'd send me updates, filling me in on what he found. And with each piece of information, the image of the woman I'd married crumbled a little more. One night, Dave called me, his tone urgent. Mark, I found something. It's big, but it's also a lot to take in. I braced myself. What is it? There's another man. She's been involved with him for years, on and off. Financial records show transactions to a hidden account, and he's been receiving regular payments from her. It goes back nearly as long as your marriage. I'd guess he's Lucy's biological father. The words hit me like a fist to the gut. Another man, a hidden life running parallel to mine all these years. She'd built this family on lies, using me as a cover for her double life. And that wasn't all. She'd been funneling money out of our joint account. Money I'd thought was for us, for our home, our future, our child. Dave went on, his voice steady but filled with a quiet fury on my behalf. There's more. That fraud ring she's tied to, she's done this before, Mark. Her previous marriage ended under suspicious circumstances, with her ex-husband being left nearly bankrupt. I tracked down the guy, and he's willing to talk if it helps your case. It was like a puzzle I'd never even known existed was snapping together in my mind, each piece revealing just how calculated, how ruthless she really was. This wasn't just a string of bad decisions. This was a deliberate, premeditated pattern of manipulation. She used people, bled them dry, and moved on without a trace of guilt. Send me everything, I told him, my voice low, my mind racing. I need all of it. Financial records, statements from her ex, anything that proves she's been manipulating me and that she's unfit to have full custody of Lucy. I'll get it to you, Dave promised. And Mark, I know this is tearing you apart, but you're doing the right thing. Lucy deserves a chance at a real, stable life. And Emily? She deserves to face the consequences. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, surrounded by evidence that painted a picture of a woman I no longer recognized. Every lie she told, every betrayal, was right there in black and white, like some twisted roadmap of our life together. When dawn broke, I knew what I had to do. Emily had gone too far, her lies too deep. For Lucy's sake, I was going to expose everything. No more secrets, no more hiding. I was ready to fight for the truth, even if it meant tearing apart the only life I'd ever known. The following morning, armed with the evidence Dave had gathered, I finally felt a grim sense of clarity. I wasn't just confronting Emily for myself anymore. I was doing it for Lucy, to protect her from a future built on deception. I called a lawyer and we set up an urgent meeting that afternoon. As I waited, the weight of what was to come settled in. Once I started down this road, there was no turning back. At the lawyer's office, I laid everything out. The hidden DNA test, the financial manipulation, the payments to Lucy's real father, and Emily's ties to the fraud ring. The lawyer listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of disbelief and steely focus. Mark, she finally said, you have a strong case, stronger than most in a situation like this, but it won't be easy. Custody battles are brutal, and without being Lucy's biological father, you'll have an uphill fight. But given Emily's actions and this extensive history, you might have a shot at joint custody. It'll be tough, but it's not impossible. Her words solidified my resolve. I would fight for Lucy no matter how difficult the road. What do I need to do? I asked, my voice steady. She outlined the steps: filing for an emergency hearing, gathering character witnesses, and getting Lucy's school records and pediatrician statements to show my involvement in her life. Then, she advised me to prepare for the backlash because once Emily found out, she would come at me with everything she had. I left the office with a strange sense of calm, a newfound purpose guiding my every step. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like everything was perfectly normal. She glanced up, barely giving me a second look. But this time I was ready. "Emily?" I said, keeping my voice level. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Oh? About what now?" Her tone was mocking, as if she'd already won. I took a breath, looking her square in the eye. "About custody arrangements. I filed for joint custody of Lucy." The words wiped the smirk off her face. For the first time, I saw a flash of fear in her eyes, quickly masked by anger. "Are you insane?" she spat. "You think you can just take her from me? I'm her mother, Mark. You're nothing but a father who's been there for her every day of her life." I interrupted, refusing to let her finish. "A father who's been lied to, manipulated, and used. But that's over. I know everything, Emily. About the payments, the fraud, the hidden accounts, and about her biological father." Her face drained of color, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. "You're bluffing," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. But I saw the panic in her eyes. "Am I?" I pulled out a folder filled with copies of bank transfers, financial statements, and evidence of her ties to her old fraud ring. I laid it on the coffee table between us, letting the truth stare back at her. She looked down at the documents, her hands trembling as she flipped through them. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mixture of rage and desperation. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You're nothing without me, Mark. You don't stand a chance." I met her gaze, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in years. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't stand a chance. But I'd rather lose fighting for Lucy than spend one more day pretending I don't see who you really are." She clenched her fists, struggling to keep control. "You think you can just erase me from her life?" I shook my head. "No, but I can make sure she grows up knowing the truth. And I can give her a life where she doesn't have to live in the shadow of your lies." Emily stood up, fury blazing in her eyes. But for once, I didn't flinch. I'd seen the worst of her, and nothing she could throw at me would shake my resolve. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat down, my heart pounding, but I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The fight had only just begun, but for the first time, I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed were like walking through a minefield. Emily became a shadow, lurking in the house with icy silence one moment and explosive outbursts the next. She was furious, yet she seemed unable to decide on her strategy. She'd go from sneering threats to icy indifference, then back to a forced sweetness when Lucy was around, like she was already crafting her image for the courtroom. But I knew her moves now, and I wasn't playing her game. One night, after Lucy had fallen asleep, Emily cornered me in the kitchen, her face twisted in barely contained fury. "So you think you've won, do you?" she spat, her voice a low hiss. "You think you can just rip her out of my life?" "I don't want to rip her out of anything," I replied calmly. "I want her to have a chance at stability, at honesty. Something you don't seem capable of giving her." She laughed, a bitter, mocking sound that grated against my nerves. "Honesty? You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing, Mark. Just a pathetic man who can't stand up for himself unless he has his big brother holding his hand." I clenched my jaw but didn't let her see she'd rattled me. "Say what you want, Emily. I'm done with your games." "Games?" she whispered, stepping closer, her voice chillingly quiet. "You haven't seen anything yet. You want a war, Mark? Fine. But remember, you're the one who started this." The next morning, I noticed her ramping up her campaign. She suddenly morphed into the perfect mother, doting on Lucy, constantly in her orbit, as if performing for an invisible audience. She'd take Lucy out for spontaneous trips to the park, bake cookies, buy new clothes. She became this warm, attentive figure I hadn't seen in years, because it had never been real. It was all for show, a fabricated version of herself she planned to parade in court. Then, one night, just as I was putting Lucy to bed, Emily appeared in the doorway, a sickly sweet smile plastered on her face. "Lucy, honey," she cooed. "Why don't you come stay with me in my room tonight? We'll have a little mommy-daughter sleepover." Lucy looked at me, her eyes uncertain. She'd always preferred her own room, her own space, and Emily rarely ever made such requests. I gave her a small nod, wanting to ease her mind. "It's okay, Lucy. You can go if you'd like." Reluctantly, Lucy agreed, and Emily took her by the hand, casting a final, triumphant look over her shoulder at me before leading her down the hall. I knew what she was doing, planting seeds of doubt in Lucy, trying to pull her closer, hoping to create a divide between us. The next day, I called Dave again, telling him everything Emily had been doing to manipulate Lucy. "She's not going to stop," I said, voice low with frustration. "She'll use every trick in the book to get what she wants, even if it means confusing and hurting our daughter in the process." "Then we're going to need more than documents," Dave said, his voice steady and resolute. "We need to build a case that shows her pattern, her instability, and her willingness to manipulate even her own child. That's what a court will care about." I felt a flicker of hope. "How do we do that?" "We get character witnesses. Friends, neighbors, anyone who's seen her real side. The side she hides from everyone else. And Mark, if you're okay with it, I can start recording our conversations. Legally, it's a gray area, but if it can prove that she's unfit." I hesitated, feeling the weight of what he was suggesting. Recording Emily felt invasive, like crossing a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. But then I thought of Lucy, the quiet moments when she'd look up at me, her eyes trusting and innocent. She didn't deserve to be caught in Emily's web, a pawn in whatever twisted game she was playing. "Do it," I said finally. "Whatever it takes." Dave agreed, and as I hung up, I felt a strange, steely calm settle over me. Emily had declared war, and I'd do whatever it took to protect my daughter. This wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. It was about shielding Lucy from the woman who, until now, had only shown her a carefully constructed mask. As I sat alone in the dark, I realized that this was only the beginning. Emily was going to fight tooth and nail to hold on to her control. But this time I was ready for her. She wasn't going to win, not as long as I had breath in me to fight. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and the weight of everything we'd been through bore down on me as I walked into the courtroom. Emily was already there, dressed in a somber, respectable outfit, her expression perfectly arranged to convey quiet confidence and motherly concern. She barely glanced at me as I took my seat. Her lawyer sat beside her, flipping through a thick stack of notes and documents. But I knew what was real and what wasn't. I knew what had led us to this point. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Today, we're going to focus on Lucy. We'll establish that you've been her primary parent, someone who has provided stability and love. And then, we'll introduce the evidence we've gathered to show the judge the other side of Emily." It was the longest morning of my life. Emily's lawyer went first, painting her as the devoted mother, the victim of a husband who had questionable motives in attempting to secure custody. They highlighted her recent activities with Lucy, her trips to the park, the story times, even the mommy-daughter sleepovers. I watched Emily play her role with such ease that I felt almost sick, but I focused on breathing, on keeping myself steady. Then it was our turn. My lawyer began by establishing my role in Lucy's life, with evidence of our bond, school attendance records, medical history showing my involvement in every checkup and appointment, testimonies from friends and neighbors who had seen me with her over the years. Each piece felt like a small validation, like I was fighting back Emily's shadow one fact at a time. Finally, we brought in the evidence that Dave had gathered, the bank statements, her hidden accounts, and the recordings of Emily's threats. My lawyer played the audio, her cold voice echoing through the courtroom, her words sharp and cruel. The contrast between the woman in the recording and the demure, motherly figure she tried to present in court was undeniable. For the first time, her mask slipped, and I saw a flash of panic in her eyes as the judge looked at her with raised eyebrows. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath, focusing on the reason I was here, Lucy. I spoke about our life together, the simple joys of bedtime stories and walks in the park, the trust we'd built. I described how her smile lit up my life, how she'd become the single most important person in my world. I ended by saying, I don't want to take Lucy away from her mother, but I want to protect her from a future built on lies, manipulation, and instability. She deserves a safe, honest home, surrounded by people who put her needs first. After I finished, I glanced at Emily, who glared at me with a fury I hadn't seen before. She knew the damage was done. I'd exposed her carefully hidden life, shattered the facade she'd worked so hard to maintain. The judge listened, reviewing the evidence carefully. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he delivered his verdict. He acknowledged the bond I'd formed with Lucy, the trust and stability I'd provided. He granted me joint custody, with shared decision-making on all aspects of Lucy's life. Emily's request for sole custody was denied. In his closing remarks, he warned Emily that any attempt to interfere with Lucy's relationship with me would be taken seriously. As the judge's gavel struck, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had a chance to give Lucy the life she deserved. Emily stormed out of the courtroom, her lawyer trailing after her, but I didn't care. I had Lucy, and I had the chance to be the father she needed. That was all that mattered. As I left the courthouse, Dave was waiting for me outside, a small smile on his face. "You did it," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You finally stood up to her." I nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude toward him and everyone who'd helped me through this nightmare. "Thanks, Dave. I couldn't have done it without you." On the drive home, I thought about Lucy, about how I'd tell her that no matter what happened, I would always be there for her. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready for it. Emily had taken so much from me, but she hadn't taken my love for Lucy. And in the end, that was the one thing she could never touch.